Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 931 for March 6th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
I was talking to my partner, Alina, and she said, what do you love doing? I said, I just really want to get into the whiskey thing. That's all I wanted to do for the last, 10 years. So why don't you try it?
The Irish whiskey boom has brought a lot of newcomers into the industry, including Daithí O'Connell. He launched W.D. O'Connell Whiskey Merchants just before the pandemic started, but that has worked out better than he could have hoped for. We'll meet Daithí O'Connell later on Whiskey Cast in depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, and March's Whiskey Club of the Month. The news is next on this week's Whiskey Cast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Trying to fit the best of Ireland into one day, huh? Good luck. Takes us at least 12 years.
Happy St. Patrick's Day from Redbreast, proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine now in its second week of fighting, more spirits companies are pulling out of the Russian market in protest. Diageo, Pernod Ricard, White & Mackay, and Campari are just some of the companies that have stopped exporting spirits to Russia, while Brown-Forman has put a hold on its plans to set up its own distribution unit in Russia instead of relying on third-party importers. Rob Marin is in charge of international trade issues at the Distilled Spirits Council. I asked him to assess the potential impact on spirits exports.
Russia is a fairly large export market for American spirits. Looking at Russia's import data, it was around $70 million last year. I think, we're all watching in horror, what's happening in Ukraine, and all, very hopeful that this will be resolved quickly and in a peaceful manner. I think the economic impact of the sanctions on Russia, I think, you're going to see an increase, a spike in commodities and grains and further impacts on the supply chain as ships are not wanting to go to the Black Sea or go to Russia, ports in Russia. I think you might see some downstream impacts there that will further impact the already struggling shipping industry. So, I think it's hard to tell, but it's something that we're watching very closely. And I know this is the Whiskey Cast, but something that we've done a lot of work over the last week or so is just, working with the media to highlight that most of the vodkas that Americans think are in fact Russian are in fact produced in the U.S. or in Latvia, and that U.S. imports of Russian vodka are quite small. The potential impact on American spirits exports, I think, is very large. And of course, our friends in Europe who may have a larger footprint in the Russian market are also very concerned.
Discus released its 2021 spirits export data this week, and while exports showed a 14% gain over 2020's pandemic-affected numbers, the impact of tariffs still held exports below pre-tariff levels. Whiskeys accounted for 61% of all U.S. spirits exports last year by value, but Rob Marin says it'll take some time for exporters to show gains, even though the European Union tariffs have been suspended.
It's going to take some time, to be frank, for a lot of the smaller craft distillers to start to rebuild those relationships with their importers, with their colleagues in the hospitality sector, to really start to see that growth. That's something that we continue to remind the Biden administration, which we are very grateful for all of their efforts, secure the important suspensions with the EU and the UK. But I think it's critical for long-term planning for large, small, and medium distillers alike on both sides of the Atlantic to make sure that we get back to a permanent 0-for-0 tariffs between the US, EU, and UK.
There is still no progress in resolving the dispute over steel and aluminum tariffs with Great Britain that led to the UK's retaliatory tariffs on American whiskies. But Marin cited the steel deal between the U.S. and Japan this month as a sign that the Biden administration wants to get that issue resolved worldwide. Meanwhile, English distillers are now seeking geographical protection for their whiskies in the same way that Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey are protected. The English Whiskey Guild's 16-member distilleries have applied to the UK government to create a geographical indication for English whiskey. It'd be a relatively young category. The first whiskey distillery in England in more than a century opened in 2006, when the English Whiskey Company opened its St. George's distillery. Whiskey maker Sarah Burgess has announced the first of her new plans since leaving the Macallan in January. She'll be collaborating with the team at the Craigellachie Hotel to create a series of sodas highlighting Speyside botanicals. She told the spirits business that she wants them to be mixed with whiskeys, gins, or tequilas. That's not a sign that Sarah is getting out of the whiskey business, though. She told me in an email that she is still working on her next role in the whiskey world, and we'll have her on the show at that time. Meanwhile, Edrington has yet to name her successor at the Macallan. However, Beam Suntory has named the successor for longtime Lafroig distillery manager John Campbell. Barry McAffer was John's assistant for the last 5 years and grew up next to the distillery on Islay. Barry was not available for interviews this week, but we are hoping to have him on WhiskeyCast soon. And by the way, Barry is no relation to longtime Bowmore distillery manager Eddie McAffer. Elsewhere, we have some new whiskeys to mention. Chivas Brothers is releasing a new series of secret Speyside bottlings with 10 single casks between the ages of 25 and 29 years old. The 10 casks come from 4 distilleries: Longmorn, Glenkeith, Braes of Glenlivet, also known as Breval, and the long-gone Caperdonic Distillery. They'll be available in limited amounts at select whiskey shops worldwide. There's no word on pricing. Heaven Hill is launching a new series of rare whiskeys. The first release in the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection is a 17-year-old barrel-proof bourbon blended from barrels between 17 and 20 years old. The Heritage Collection will become an annual springtime release, while the Parker's Heritage Collection will continue to come out each fall with more experimental releases. The initial release will be available on a limited basis for around $275 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskeyCast website. Louisville's Habitat for Humanity chapter has launched a project to help rebuild homes in western Kentucky destroyed in last December's tornadoes, and will be raffling off a bunch of bourbons. The prizes include a 6-bottle Van Winkle collection, while second and third prizes include Pappy Van Winkle bottles, along with other rare whiskeys. Tickets are $100 each and will be available through March 28th, unless they sell out sooner. And finally, the Bomb Squad paid a visit to Buffalo Trace Distillery this week. The Lexington Herald-Leader reports that the distillery's archives apparently held a World War II-era bomb, as well as other artifacts. According to the distillery, archivists found the bomb while they were unpacking boxes. The building was evacuated, and the Kentucky State Police Bomb Squad removed the device safely. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long on our social media timelines and at WhiskeyCast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskeyCast.
Join us each Friday at 5 p.m. New York time for our Happy Hour live webcast on the WhiskeyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. If you missed last Friday's webcast with writers Susanna Skyver-Barton and Shanna Farrell, the on-demand replay is available right now on our YouTube channel. Time now for the Whiskey Cast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Women in Whiskey has a pair of Texas Spirits nights this week on Wednesday in Austin and Thursday night in San Antonio. Tickets are still available for Wednesday night's New Riff Bourbon Dinner at Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville and Thursday night's Whiskey and Barrel Night in New York City. Next week, the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society's U.S. chapter has a series of members-only tastings with Charlie McLean. It starts on Monday night in New York, followed by Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, Waco, Texas Wednesday, Seattle on Thursday, and Los Angeles Friday. The Whiskey Exchange's virtual edition of the Old and Rare Show takes place March 18th through the 20th, and the Australian Malt Whiskey Tasting Championship is set for March 26th in Sydney. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
Whiskey Cast in Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Irish whiskey continues to show strong growth each year, and that is bringing a lot of new faces into the business. People like Daithí O'Connell have dreamed of being part of Irish whiskey's renaissance, and his W.D. O'Connell Whiskey Merchants is just one of many upstarts trying to make their own place in the market. I've spent some time with him recently on a Zoom call. First of all, who was W.D. O'Connell?
I am W.D. O'Connell. So my full name is William Daithí O'Connell, or William Dave. David is the English version of Daithí. They're not like for like, but they're kind of paired together. So I am William David O'Connell. I'm the first O'Connell from my family anyway in the whiskey business. The O'Connell family, my dad's family, were blacksmiths and merchant storekeepers. So they wouldn't have traded alcohol at all, actually.
Even though the hardware stores in Ireland tend to sell alcohol too?
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, not in this shop. This shop would have been in really rural, and it would have been selling like all the equipment for the local farmers and boxes of fish and dried fish, and like it was opened up in about 1890. So you can imagine what they were selling. Like you would be getting a jar of sugar and some box of tea and dried fish and stuff like that, and then equipment for around the farm. So then they sold machinery in that then as well, as machinery was developing, and because of the blacksmith skills, then they could service the machinery and fix it. And and that's why Bill Phil came about, because the blacksmith connection was they made a tool for cutting turf or footing turf or peat, and as most people know it, and Bill Phil was the nickname. So the Bill Phil Schlon was famous far and wide back in West Limerick back in the day. And that was for cutting turf, footing turf. And I just thought it was a nice kind of nod to hat tip to them, those people who had to work extremely hard and had had much tougher lives than we have, and to keep it going. So the Bill Phil is the family name then. So William Philip O'Connell was my great grandfather, and he became known as Bill Phil because there were so many other O'Connells around in this area. They weren't all related, and they had to differentiate. So they gave nicknames. So he became Bill Phil, Bill for William, and Phil for Philip. And then all his kids became Jackie. My granddad was Jackie Bill Phil, and my dad was Billy Bill Phil, and I'm a Bill Phil, and my kids are now Bill Phils.
So you can't escape this then?
No, I think it's great. It's nice to be a Bill Phil. It's good. It's helpful down there. You get a beer every now and then.
So tell me about the company. You get into the whiskey business. Why and what were you doing before?
Before. So I was when I left school, I got into the hotel trade. I wanted to be a hotel manager for a long time. Even when I was in school, I was trading the weekends and the summer to go off to Switzerland and get my training, my formal training done and be a hotel manager and travel the world. And then I decided, after working hotels for a few summers and then for about maybe a year, this is not what I want to do. I want to be my own boss. I don't like being bossed around so much. So I went back to college, moved to Cork from Killarney, and I studied property, and I finished the course and property management and valuations, and I was working in bars part-time the whole time. And then I moved to Denmark and Australia, traveling Australia back to Denmark, and I ended up came back, and I had my own bar with a group of guys I knew in Kinsale, County Cork. And then I progressed to nightclub. I had a nightclub and a live music venue as well in Cork City. And then just before the crash, I left for Australia to take up training to be a pilot. Completed my training to be a pilot in Southeast Queensland. And then I moved to Hong Kong. A friend of mine who had met in Kinsale all those years before that had opened the bar there, and he was constantly asking me to come over and join him. And I'd spent so much of my money not working in Australia, but learning to fly for a while. And flying, as you know, is not cheap. So I said, okay, I'll go to Hong Kong and I'll recoup some money in a bar in Hong Kong. And I'd never been to Hong Kong before. That was pretty great. And I just ditched the idea of becoming an airline pilot then in Hong Kong, even though I was accepted into an airline. I just decided this is just too much fun being an entrepreneur. Hong Kong really opened my eyes up to what the possibilities are. I started the boat hire business with a few guys, a party boat hire business, and then I started the payment technology company, which went quite well for a while, and not financially well, but we ticked all the boxes that we set out to tick. I think from developing a product and delivering cool events at scale. Did that, and the whole idea of that technology company is because I wanted to build a distillery back in Killarney, actually, where I'd started all those years before. And I thought I was going to be, super rich from this payment tech company, and I'd be able to build my cool distillery in the Scottish style out under the mountain and by the river. And that didn't happen. And it was going ahead. I had discussions with Foresights, and we had agreed to plant size, and I'd agreed to site, and I had an architect and engineers, and so a lot of work was done on it. And I just realized it was far too big a project. It was nearly 1 million LPA, 900,000 LPA plant. I was traveling too much and everything. So, a few personal issues in my life as a result of that as well, with the work ethic. And I ended up moving back to Ireland myself, worked with my other company still out of Dubai for a couple of years, and kept my eye on the whiskey business the whole time. I'm a big whiskey fan. I was drinking whiskey all the time, and the interest was always there. And then I just decided, a couple of life-changing things again happening, becoming a dad, and my own dad passed away at the same time, a few months apart. And I was talking to my partner, Alina, and she said, what do you love doing? And I said, I just really want to get into the whiskey thing. That's all I wanted to do for the last, 10 years. She said, why don't you try it? So that was at Christmas. And in January, I kind of picked the phone up to Mr. Teeling and got the ball rolling with meetings again, because I had been speaking to him all those years before, obviously, as well. And I went full time at it then in May that year of 19. We launched the brand in November 19 with the route as an independent bottler, and we will be a bonder also, but we will use the independent bottler logo. And we will not just bottle Irish whiskey, bottle Scotch, Japanese, bourbon, US malt, whatever's good. If we like it, it'll go in a bottle. Rum,
your timing was exquisite in terms of getting this company started right before everything shut down. How did the pandemic affect you?
I was extremely lucky. That is, you kind of curse yourself some days going, oh, nothing's going right for you, but like it went right. If you think about it, you hit the nail on the head. We had just launched in like end of November, it was December really of 19. And we had done 2 single casks, and then we just launched a new batch of bill fill, our first batch of bill fill on the 13th of March, and everything shut down on the 16th. And it worked out really well for us, luckily. So there was no pressure on me to travel so much, which was good. And we were able to focus on, building out the business a bit, the back end of the business, while progressing the sales and trying to look for new markets, on a soft approach. And that was good. Overheads were kept down. So we've been able to accelerate quite well as a result. I feel the pandemic benefited me a bit, I think.
And that way you were able to grow it slowly instead of having to rush everything to market and come out with a bunch of things and try to sell them all over
I also
the place,
didn't
right?
have to and I also didn't have to sell any shares. So we've managed to grow the business, I think, at a pretty fast rate to where it's at. It's still a pretty small business. When you're starting at zero, it's easy to achieve big number growth. But it's been good, and we've identified our headquarters, and we're started work on it. And we move in there on, we're in there, but the work is ongoing, and we should be ready to rock in March. And we have, a maturation facility there that can hold 65,000 bulk liters of whiskey. On racks that are underside in racks, like the system that you see in Macallan. I'm sure you've been there. So we only have to move 7 barrels to get the most barrels we'd have to ever move is 7, and we can access and take samples from every barrel without moving anything. And we can extend that out probably by 3 if we needed to. We've got blending tanks, 2 bottling lines, and then space for growth from there. With yard space, etc., that we can grow out into. And also we've got another 8,000 square foot building from the 1850s attached to it, which we're going to renovate too and turn into a shop and experience rooms for putting on events and things like that.
So are the distillery plans completely out of the picture now, or is that something that you might do down the road?
No, I'm fully when I looked back on what I wanted to be, I wanted whiskey. I didn't want a distiller. I don't want to be a distiller. I think it'd be lovely to own a distillery up to a point, but it brings with it a lot of other headaches. And then the capital investment is so intensive. Where's you have to find that right line. And I have good knowledge of what that looks like from all the work I had done on the other distillery project. So, if I had that money, I could do a lot with that money in terms of building an interesting brand and trying to acquire stocks in multiple countries around the world and trying to kind of set ourselves up on the Scottish independent bottler model, like Cadenheads, Douglas Lang, etc. That's where we're at, I think, really. And that's what I want to try and push out.
You mentioned John Teeling, who supplies a lot of the bulk whiskey out there through his Great Northern Distillery, and before that was at Cooley, where your older whiskeys have come from. How hard has it been to get whiskey in bulk these days? I know that there's a demand for it, and John's the only one supplying whiskey in bulk, and I'm not even sure he can meet the demand.
So I guess you hit the nail on the head. Like it's the same the world over. It doesn't seem to be. So you can get young whiskey pretty readily. I think I haven't had any issues with it, but maybe some people have. But also maybe because I got in at the right time before. You have to look after your existing customers too. So you have to hope that they can grow. I guess you have to kind of close the door on other people then. as a result, if you're supplying on the older stock, that's just crazy now. And I was lucky to get what I did when I did on that. I luckily acquired a little more last year of it, and just acquiring a little more now this month. But you won't see me doing, 9,000 bottle releases of 18-year-old whiskey, that's for sure.
What will we see you doing, though? Small releases of smaller batches, obviously?
Yeah, so I know the small batch gets a bad rap, and because it's not defined, obviously. It's not legally defined anywhere. And so I've kind of set our stall out that our batches will be no more than 10 barrels. So that can give you an idea of the size of batch that we could get to. But our largest batch to date has been 900 bottles. So they're not big. I would like to get rid of the batch. So our batch products are the bill fill and the single grain at the moment, and they need to develop still because we're trying to understand as the stock progresses and it gets older what we can do with it. But I would like to find a sweet spot there and then stop doing batches and maybe turn that into an annual release.
One of the things you mentioned is that you want to get back to reviving the tradition of whiskey bonding. Louise McGuane at Chapel Gate has been instrumental in reviving that. And explain what bonding is for the folks outside of Ireland who are not familiar with this unique tradition.
Yeah, so bonding, as you said, is an old tradition, and it goes back to where the merchant storekeepers, publicans, in the small towns all over Ireland would have been bringing in, I guess, wines and ports and that, especially around the port areas, mainly the larger towns. They would have been importing a lot of wines and sherries and ports at the time, fortified stuff, I would imagine, mainly. And maybe some rum as well. There was a lot of rum coming in through Cork port, I believe, because the Admiralty was based down there for the British Empire. And I think, so what happened was then they would empty those barrels and then they'd need to go and what do I do with my barrel? And they'd refill it then with local whiskey from the local distilleries. So that happened a lot. And a lot of the brands that we know today that still survived the kind of the fall of Irish whiskey, the Jameson and Bushmans, etc., they would have been not bottling under their own brand at all. They would have been allowing publicans and bar owners, merchant storekeepers, etc., to bottle their own product, as would Guinness have as well. They would send down the barrels and you'd bottle it locally and sell it. So some guys would have bottled under their own brand, like what in Louise's case, I believe JJ Corrie bottled under his own brand, and other people would just use the label then which happened at a slightly later time, that they would supply to say that it is approved, Jameson whiskey or Powers, etc. And then obviously they all moved into, consolidation happened post-World War II, I believe, they would have moved into starting bottling for themselves, really, and moving away from that. And it just died out, really. And Louise did a super job reviving it. And it's really great to see what she's doing, putting her own touch on all of that down in Clare.
And it opened up the door for you to do the same thing, because I know there were Irish revenue folks and the tax folks who didn't quite understand what she was doing when she revived it. But once they figured it out, because they had all sorts of issues with, you're storing whiskey, but you're not actually distilling it. And she had a bunch of tax issues, or at least revenue issues, that got sorted out to make it possible essentially for you to be able to do your business, right?
Yeah, I guess like that. Yeah. So I guess revenue operates here, in the States, they're all separate in every jurisdiction. And unfortunately, in the excise department, they're a bit like barristers or lawyers. They have an opinion on something rather than a defined guide to follow. So in each town, each county, I guess, or division, they all have their own opinions or their own experiences. So Clare would have had very little experience, or none at all, actually, in living memory, I guess. Whereas I was based in Cork when I started, and they obviously have a lot of experience in Cork, with Middleton and back in, since for a long, long time. There's always been distilling in Cork since distilling began in Ireland. So it was a little easier for me to have that conversation, and I got my warehouse keeper, tenancy through Cork first, and then in Waterford, then obviously there has been Blackwater here since 2014 as a distillery, albeit gin, and at the time only whiskey recently in 2018, I think. But and then the Waterford distillery before me. So the conversation here has been quite easy and laid back because they have, again, the experience built up. So that was helpful. I don't envy Louise having to do that in Clare at all. It must have been at a time as well when there was no real talk about Irish whiskey. The boom wasn't in mainstream. Now everybody knows, oh, sure, Irish whiskey's flying. The woman who doesn't even drink knows it's going well. So it must have been tough. And I think we've been lucky to work in two counties where the history was already there before us.
The history is there, but the future is another question altogether. How bright is the future for Irish whiskey? Can it get back to those days of 125 years ago before Prohibition when Irish whiskey ruled the whiskey industry, basically?
Can it get back there? I don't think so, because I think, it's a very different time. Obviously being part of the British Empire back then was a huge driving force in that. And then having the US, the Irish connection with the US and having all the right guys in the right places, I guess, over there at the time, probably helped a lot. And we were at the forefront of whiskey from in terms of what Scotland were doing and Ireland were doing at those times were very different. We were doing it at scale and on a much more industrial level. Was really impressive when you look back at how they were operating. It was incredible. The volume some of them got to. Nowadays we live in a globalized world where you're competing with bourbon and Japanese and Canadian and Danish and you name it. There's whiskey in every corner of the world now. So I don't think we can get to those levels, but I think we can certainly get back well above where we're at. I would see us, hopefully getting to 2.5, 3 times where we're at now. I think that would be really good.
How would you define success 5 years from now for your company, for W.D. O'Connell Whiskey Merchants? What does that story look like 5 years from now for you to be happy?
Still in business.
That's a given. Let's assume that's a given.
Where does success look like 5 years from now? I think I'd like to be, more established in our brand home, have all of the brand home finished off and the other building completed, and maybe be in about 25 markets, 30 markets. That would be good. And hopefully I'll have, maybe doing somewhere between, 15, 20,000 cases a year. It's nothing huge,
Doesn't take that much to be a success in the Irish whiskey business.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't need to be at 15 or 20,000 cases, I think, to pay my bills, but that would be nice. I'd like to get it. I documented at the start. I wanted to get maybe to about 50,000 cases over 15 years. So I don't know if that's possible. We'll see. It's always good to have a target. You need to kind of picture it and put it on the vision board and see if you can get there. Doesn't mean we have to get there. We could have a very nice life, business here, a family business that we can develop. And it's more about the quality. So maybe, that's kind of what I figured we'd have to do to get to certain numbers. But again, it's more about the quality. So you can do less numbers and higher quality. That's also better. I prefer to do that. That makes sense.
There's a link for the W.D. O'Connell website in the show notes for this episode at whiskeycast.com. And thanks to Daithí O'Connell. And thanks to Daithí O'Connell for spending some time with us on this week's WhiskeyCast in Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. And let's start with a couple of the W.D. O'Connell whiskeys. Bill Phil is a lightly peated single malt distilled at Great Northern Distillery and matured in First Fill ex-bourbon barrels. It's bottled at 47.5% ABV. The nose has a soft peatiness with touches of grilled fruits, shortbread cookies, and a nice maltiness. The taste is peaty and tart with a good smokiness and touches of grilled citrus, lemon pepper spice, honey, and vanilla. The finish is long and warm with a subtle smokiness, and I'm scoring the W.D. O'Connell Bill Phil a 92. W.D. O'Connell's 10-year-old single grain was distilled at Cooley Distillery. It's matured in a combination of ex-bourbon and rye casks and bottled at 48% ABV. The nose has fruity notes of peaches and pears, along with honey, vanilla, and dried grass clippings. The taste has notes of honey, caramel, vanilla, tree fruits, and gentle spices. The finish is nice and long with a good touch of oak, along with gentle spices and hints of tree fruits. I'm scoring the W.D. O'Connell 10-year-old Irish single-grain whiskey a 90. More tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore Farm and Waterfront Distillery. In-person tastings are available once again at the distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. And you can get a free virtual guided tasting when you buy a bottle at your local retailer. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code word WhiskeyCast to get a free guided tasting from a Sagamore Spirit teammate. Please drink responsibly. Slane Irish Whiskey has released a special edition to mark the 40th anniversary of the Slane Castle Concert Series. It's similar to the standard Slane Triple Cask blend, but this one uses a higher percentage of new American oak casks. It's also bottled at 45% ABV instead of the usual 40%. The nose is nice and aromatic with touches of caramel, crystallized ginger, dried fruits, and vanilla. The taste is spicy with a thick, chewy mouthfeel and touches of ginger, honey, and vanilla. The finish, long and fruity. I'm scoring the Slane Special Edition a 92. Received a sample this week of the new 5 Trail blended whiskey from the Coors Whiskey Company. Yes, as we reported a few months ago, the beer-making Coors family has expanded into whiskey. 5 Trail blends Colorado single malt from an undisclosed distillery with bourbon from the Bardstown Bourbon Company. It's bottled at 47.5% ABV, and the nose is dry with hints of tobacco, leather, caramel, and a touch of oak. The taste has notes of caramel apples, cinnamon, honey, dried fruits, leather, and tobacco. And the finish? Well, it lingers nicely with dried fruits, gentle spices, and a touch of oak. I'm scoring 5 Trail Blended American Whiskey a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskeyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
It's time to announce March's Whiskey Club of the Month, and I got this email a few weeks ago from Willem Killian nominating his club. Dear Mark, I'm reaching out to you on behalf of the Whiskey Warriors in Bloemfontein, South Africa, I hope I'm pronouncing that town correctly, for your consideration of the Whiskey Club of the Month. I don't know if I even have any business calling it a club, as we are a small and very informal group of enthusiasts, but I'm giving it a shot anyway. Started by just myself and one other fellow whiskey nerd and longtime friend in 2020, we have recently begun to have tastings with more than a handful of people at a time. However, there are some positive signs as the word is spreading of our little group, and a few more people are expressing interest in joining us. Our tastings always comprise a very open and non-judgmental assortment of everything from budget supermarket blends to higher-aged fine Scotch whiskies, sometimes also dotted here and there with a single cask or special release. All are enjoyed and appreciated equally. Our philosophy is that the only good bottle of whiskey is an open one, and the best whiskey is the one you can share with friends who can truly appreciate it. It's challenging to get a hold of proper tasting glasses in our area, and real Glencairns are practically impossible to get. Knockoffs are available, though, and we have managed to get a hold of a few that we can share and use if we rinse them out in between drams. Still, we've always had a great time appreciating what whiskey from all over the world has to offer. Thank you for the podcast, which adds so much information and talking points and further enhances the experience. Yours sincerely, Willem. Well, thank you, Willem, and we'll try to help you with that shortage of proper tasting glasses. We're going to send you 24 Whiskey Cast Glencairn glasses to use at your club tastings. Now, if you're in a whiskey club and would like to nominate your club for next month's Club of the Month, it's easy. Just do like Willem did and use the contact form at whiskeycast.com to get in touch with us. If your club has a website or a social media presence, we'll be glad to add a link on our Whiskey Clubs page at the website, too. And if you have nominated your club before, please get back in touch with us. Since the pandemic caused a lot of clubs to stop meeting, we would like to make sure that we're honoring active clubs each month. Once again, congratulations to the Whiskey Warriors of Bloemfontein, South Africa, March's Whiskey Club of the Month. And thanks to Glencairn Crystal for helping us honor whiskey clubs all over the world. Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. I had the chance to taste Castle & Key's first bourbon release the other night and posted a photo of the sample bottle on Instagram, where Ryan C919 posted this comment. I had some 2 years ago and thought it was stunning, was a benefit of getting in on a certain barrel pick, and it was indeed their own bourbon. Loved it, can't wait to see what you think of it. Well, I'll be visiting Castle & Key Distillery this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it next time around. Gregoire Serafian in France posted this comment on LinkedIn about our Happy Hour Live webcast a couple of weeks ago with Lance Winters and Dave Smith of California's St. George Spirits. St. George Single Malt was the very first U.S. single malt I ever tried, and they were not well known at that time. In fact, John Glazer made me try it in his lab and studio during my visit and blending course in 2007, and it did impress me by its subtlety and its very fruity profile, not so far from what John created later on. But that's another story. Cheers! Thanks, Gregoire. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskeyCast, or just email us. The address is comments@whiskeycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Isla single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine & More store in the U.S., and specialty whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's wrap up the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. We celebrated a milestone anniversary this week, the 125th anniversary of the Bottled-in Bond Act of 1897 in the United States. Before President Grover Cleveland signed the bill on his final full day in office on March 3rd of 1897, whiskey was the equivalent of the Wild West. Since whiskey was still largely being sold by the barrel, so-called rectifiers would cut their genuine whiskey with damn near anything they could use to stretch it out. I'd tell you some of the stuff they used, but For all I know, you might be eating while you're listening to this podcast, and some of the stuff they used might just turn your stomach. What the Bottled in Bond Act did, though, was establish the first-ever consumer protection law. It put the backing of the federal government behind the pledge that a bottled in bond whiskey met specific legal and quality standards. But what it also did for distillers was create the legal framework to allow them to delay paying excise taxes on their whiskey while it matured. Before then, the taxes were due as soon as the spirit came off the still, but creating government-supervised bonded warehouses made it possible to guarantee that the taxes would eventually be paid when the whiskey was removed from those bonded warehouses for sale. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskeycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskeycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast. The email address, comments at whiskeycast.com.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.